Hello number ones and welcome to Metatron's Academy, the channel where we explore how to learn languages in the most fun and effective way possible. Today we're going to address the top 10 most common myths that have to do with language learning, so you don't waste your time, money, effort and focus on stuff that isn't real. And now, without further ado, let's jump into the list. At number 10 on this list we have learn languages while sleeping. Now if you've been learning languages for a while, you've been even entertaining the idea of learning another language, I'm sure you've heard this one. Just have a recording of someone speaking Japanese, Mandarin, Italian, put it in your ears, sleep, and then in the morning when you wake up, boom, like magic, you have memorized all of those words, and that's complete bullshit. There's absolutely no evidence, no scientific evidence whatsoever that sleeping and listening to a foreign language at the same time helps you retain vocabulary or make any progress at all. If anything, the only thing that listening to vocabulary while you sleep is going to do is either nothing in the best of cases or actually disrupt your sleep patterns and the overall quality of your sleep. So where is this myth coming from? Well, unfortunately, it's coming from a popular belief, and I think that people are trying to exploit the fact that students usually want shortcuts. They want to learn things with putting minimal effort into it. And even though there are ways to maximize your results and try to get the best out of the minimum possible amount of effort that you need to put into language learning techniques, but this doesn't work. And it's just a way to try and convince people that they can just do something that requires no effort at all, sleeping, and memorize vocabulary at the same time. It doesn't work. Don't waste time. Don't waste money. Number 9, and I wanted to put this one ahead, is you can learn a language in a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, these titles that you can find not only on videos, but also blogs, vlogs, and books, that you can become fluent in set amount of time that is ridiculously short, is a marketing technique. That's all it is. It doesn't work, and it's based on the similar principle that people want the results without putting in the effort. Reaching fluency in any language requires time, dedication, and effort. It doesn't need to be boring. It doesn't need to be necessarily extremely hard, and it can be a very fun process. But no one can reach fluency in 2 weeks, or 4 weeks, or 30 days, or whatever silly number they are coming up with. And really, to debunk this one, you can just ask yourself, can natives learn their own language in 2 weeks? If not even natives can do it, no one can do it. At number 8, we have the myth, you need to have exceptional talent to learn a language. So far we have kind of spoken about things that are a little negative, I suppose, because I need to kind of debunk this idea that it's going to be super easy, but this one instead is a positive reinforcement. People think sometimes that unless you are exceptionally talented, there is no way you can learn a language or bring it to fluency, but that's actually wrong. All human beings are programmed to learn languages, and of course we do better with our own native tongues because we learn them organically since we are babies. With that being said, the pathways, the way the brain works, is already configured for you to learn communication, spoken communication, body language, and all the other things that really shape the way we communicate as humans. Given people who are exceptionally talented will shine. It will be easier for them and they will probably reach higher results. But everyone can learn a language and everyone can reach a reasonable level of fluency if they put enough effort and if they do it correctly and with the right techniques. You don't need to be an exceptional genius to learn fluency in a foreign tongue. Number 7 has more to do with the approach we have towards language learning, and it's the idea that you have to learn how to read and how to write at the same time as you're learning how to speak a language. All natives first learn how to speak, then learn how to read and write. Oftentimes instead, what we do in language classes is the exact opposite. They teach us how to read, they teach us how to write, they teach us even how to translate, but there is no speaking involved. As a language teacher and trainer, in my opinion, the best way to learn a language is to follow the example of native learning. Of course, I'm not saying do 100% conversation and completely ignore reading and writing for 2 years. Do put a little reading and a little writing in your conversation lessons, but absolutely give the majority of your attention to conversation and pronunciation, and then add a little pill of reading and a little pill of writing. If you are learning a language that is particularly complicated when it comes to their way of writing, for example, Japanese, Mandarin, for those you might need to have an extra class, which is what I would suggest. do absolutely tackle the reading and the writing early on, because otherwise it's going to take you just forever. But don't just learn reading and writing, forget about conversation, and expect to become fluent in the language, because it's never going to happen. Prioritize the spoken and then introduce the reading and writing organically. The next point covers a completely different topic, and that is the financial aspect of learning a language. People say that learning a language is always extremely expensive, and if you don't have the money, don't even try. Well, the reality is that even though learning a language can become expensive, it doesn't necessarily need to be. And it very much has to do with the sort of connections that you have. Of course, if you have friends that you can play with, talk with, chat and hang out with, well, you can do that, and it has virtually no cost. If anything, you might need to buy a game and play with them. But of course, what if you don't have friends or relatives that you can practice with? Well, there are a lot of options. For example, there are websites that allow you to do exchange student programs, whereby you have a 1 hour lesson with someone who's native, and then you do half an hour, you speak your language, half an hour they speak their language, and these usually cost nothing. Regardless, even if you might want to go to a class or pay for private tutoring, you can also complement that with so much resources and material that are free and available on YouTube and many other websites, and I will make a dedicated video to give you some good pointers, that really the amount of money you have to spend on a language is connected to how much you want to spend. In the sense that if you have the money and you want to travel to the country 3 times a year, of course that's going to cost you quite a lot of money, but you don't have to. You can, and the more money you have, the more stuff and resources you can get. But at the end of the day, learning a language can be cheap. And yes, I will make a dedicated video on how to study languages in the cheapest way possible. If that's something you're interested in, make sure to join Metatron's Academy and let me know in the comments below. The next myth is you absolutely have to live in the country where they speak the language you're targeting, otherwise you will never reach fluency. I have said many times already on this platform and in my other platform that it is absolutely important and something I always recommend to my students to spend some time in the country where they speak the language that they're learning. So you're learning English, move to England, spend some time in America, go to Ireland, what have you. You're learning Japanese, go to Japan. You're learning French, maybe spend some time in France. It is absolutely a great way to improve quickly and make enormous leaps forward in your ability to learn a language and to reach fluency. But it's not necessarily mandatory, in the sense that depending on the language you're studying, I have seen people reach a reasonable level of fluency, maybe not becoming perfectly fluent or business level fluent, but reaching a reasonable level of fluency without ever stepping foot in their target country. There is a famous speaker here, an English guy from Manchester, who reached an incredible level of fluency in Mandarin while living in Manchester. Now, given he is particularly talented, and also he had many Chinese friends in Manchester that he could spend time with, so in a way he kind of simulated the aspects of living in another country. But that's something that you can do. So can you reach fluency without moving to the country of your target languages? Yes, but it's much harder. So I would suggest you to do spend time in those countries, but the idea that it's absolutely impossible to reach fluency without moving to that country is a myth. The next point is pronunciation doesn't matter. I've heard this one so many times when I was a full-time student at university majoring in foreign languages, and believe it or not, it was language students who were literally majoring in languages as their academic path and field that were saying this. And this has always blown my mind, because pronunciation is the foundation of language learning. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to learn to sound exactly like a native. It's a monumental task. But people that say, oh, well, you don't need to sound exactly like a French to speak French, even though it's true, they also don't consider the fact that between having such a broad, thick accent that people can't understand you and sounding 100% native, there are so many shades of grey and so many intermediate and advanced levels of good pronunciation and diction that you can absolutely reach before talking about, oh, it's impossible to sound exactly like a native. Pronunciation is important also because it's one of the first aspects that people judge when they're trying to decide whether you're fluent or not, and when they're trying to assess your level, for example, during a job interview, where they don't have much time. If you sound good, also if you pronounce well, you will be clearer, and people will be able to understand what you mean much easier. You don't need to sound like a native, but ignoring pronunciation, it's a huge mistake, particularly earlier on. The next is kind of a half a myth. The idea that children are always much better than adults at learning languages. The reason why I say it's half a myth is because, of course, yes, a child, depending on the age, but in general, a child will always have an advantage against an adult in the sense that their brains are a lot more malleable. They are usually much better at learning pronunciation, and also they tend to not feel particularly awkward when they make mistakes because it's just how they are. They have less social pressure, and so in general it is easier for a child to learn a foreign language compared to a full-grown adult. With that being said, what adults tend to have as their own advantage is discipline, consistency and focus, which children don't always have. So, if you put a child in a bilingual environment, he'll learn it automatically, and that's wonderful. But if you compare, for example, a child going to a classroom to learn a language compared to an adult who's going to the same class, but they're doing it because they absolutely need it for their career, it's not automatic that the child will do better, also because maybe the child doesn't even want to be there, and it's the parents that sent him there, and so what they do is the bare minimum, and then they just want to go home and play their games. So yes, technically their brains are going to retain the information more easily, and it will be easier for them to pronounce, but an adult also has some advantages, so it's a case-by-case scenario. The next one is the myth that you need to focus entirely on grammar before you can start speaking properly. I'm not saying that grammar is not important or that grammar shouldn't be studied. Grammar should be studied, but I feel that a lot of classrooms take too much time learning grammar as if their students were trying to become grammarians or grammar teachers. The reality is that you, as a native in your own language, don't speak grammatically correct because you spend hours and months and years memorizing charts. You speak correctly by virtue of imitation, in the sense that you've been surrounded by the rules or grammar rules of your language throughout the majority of your life, and therefore you have organically learned what sounds off and what sounds right. This is one of the reasons why oftentimes natives that don't have a language training as a teacher of foreign languages, they know when something is wrong, but if you ask them why, they won't be able to tell you. So focusing on learning the grammar is great if you want to become a grammar teacher or a language teacher, but if you just want to reach fluency and you want to speak grammatically correct, you should do a little grammar, but you should learn it like the natives do, in the sense that you should learn it organically by surrounding yourself in the language and immersing yourself in the language. Last but not least is the myth that you are tone deaf. The amount of people that I've heard say, oh, I would love to learn X and Y language, but I can't because I'm tone deaf. You have no idea how many people said this. It's becoming a trend. It's becoming something that people just say. The reality is that 99% of the people that say that they're tone deaf are not tone deaf. Why do I know this? Because being tone deaf, it's a medical condition, and as such, it needs to be identified by medical professionals. And it's also quite rare. The people who say, oh, I'm tone deaf, are not saying it because they've been professionally diagnosed with the condition. They say it because they have no training, they don't understand the basics and fundamentals of phonetics, they hear something spoken in another language, they try to repeat it, they fail, and they think it's because they're tone deaf. They fail because they're not trained. Anyone who is trained into phonetics, anyone who is trained into the specific pronunciation characteristics of such language, and anyone who has put enough effort into it will be able to reproduce, at least to a reasonable level of consistency, the languages of a foreign language. You're not tone deaf. You're just saying it because someone else said it, and you think it sounds correct, and you're repeating it. Leave that terminology to the medical professionals. And with that, I would like to finish this brief list. I hope that it helps, and if you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for joining Metatron's Academy, and I will see you very soon. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.